Now it's time for our last panel. The industry organizations and the NGOs who will give their initial views and concrete suggestions on the Critical Raw Materials Act from their different perspectives. So please welcome on stage our CEO, Maria Sunér of Svemin, Malte Lohan, Director General for Orgalim, and Alexandre Affre, Deputy Director General Business Europe, Rolf Kuby, CEO Euromines, and Julia Poliscanova, she's Senior Director Vehicles and Emobility at Transport and Environment. I was thinking it's a bit crowded. Maybe we should move this table. Could we please help me to move the table a bit? Please be ready with your cameras. Okay, does that work better? Yeah. And please feel free to grab the hand mic. Make sure, see if we can make it happen. Make it work. So, what is your key takeaways from this morning's discussions? Maybe we start over there. Alexandre.
Okay. So key takeaway, I think, like many said, we are talking about something highly, highly relevant for, and many said this morning for the different transitions. I think, as many said as well, we need to act externally, diversification. We also need to act internally, do better when it comes to the European value chain. I also think, and I take from the discussion many comments, the Commission proposal is a good start. From my perspective, there is still room for improvement when it comes to permits, which have been said by many. I think the Commission tries to overcome some taboos. Maybe a few others could be challenged as well to do even more in terms of permitting. And the other thing which, here, if I may, I haven't heard so much, but there will be a lot of data requested from the member states, from companies as well, for good reasons. I think the proposal can also do better to avoid asking twice, 3 times the same information to company. And here, if I may, Article 23, Article 19, this is where you see a bit of duplication of requests on industry to provide data.
Please, we just continue. What are your key takeaways from this morning?
Thanks. Thank you for the invitation. Good morning. Happy to share the perspective from the technology industry. So the manufacturers of all the equipment, from mining equipment and construction equipment through to electrical equipment for charging infrastructure for EVs, to electrical transmission equipment, all the way to the microchips. And I think I would subscribe, 95% of that was said this morning and no need to repeat it. So let me add another perspective, which is really important from our point of view, which is, of course, we also want to do much better on the market for recycled materials, secondary raw materials. Mining is critical. All the things we've said, absolutely right. But we do need to do better on recycling. And actually, we think that by 2050, up to 75% of the demand, for example, for lithium and rare earths can come from secondary raw materials. But it's not going to happen on its own. You need a market for that. And the market for recycling depends on infrastructure for collecting, for sorting, for recycling these materials. And that's, I think, in the current draft by the Commission is a problem, because basically the message is you member states put those markets in place on your own. And we have seen time and time again it's not going to work that way. And we have seen that especially in the context of the circular economy, where we need a single market for the circular economy to work, but actually member states are putting up obstacles left, right, and center, and are making it impossible to operate as one single market. So if we want the recycled materials market to work, we need more of a harmonized, consistent approach at the European level. We cannot just delegate that to the member states. So that is one very specific part that I wanted to add, because of course there are many other things, and this is by no means the silver bullet, but I thought it was important that this is part of the conversation.
Thank you. Malte, please, Maria.
Yes, and I had the privilege of speaking earlier here as well. But I think when listening to the other speakers and panels here, I think it's extremely important that we from the mining sector continue to showcase how we can work sustainably with the communities, the local communities, but also with nature and how we can minimize our impact. I think one thing that is important to keep in mind is that, unfortunately, a mine can never choose its location. If I differ from your members, Malte, who can actually choose where they will locate their next factory, their next battery plant, etc. A mine can never do that because we have to be where we find the mineralization in the ground. And that always creates special challenges when it comes to weighing different interests against each other. And the permitting process becomes even more complex, I would say. So I think that is important to showcase from our point of view, how we can work in a good way with nature, with local communities, to take care of what we have really in the location where we are located. So that is something I take with me from this morning's discussion.
Okay, thank you, Maria. And Julia, what is your key takeaway?
Yes, thank you. Thanks also for having us as TNE here. So a few insights, and I wanted to maybe zoom in on one around environmental safeguards. But first of all, we, like so many here, fully agree this is critical. We really support the idea of strategic projects in Europe. We do support speed is essential. So the permitting provisions proposed are really good. We need that to go faster. What I wanted to stress, though, from the debate we had here before is that, I think Ron misconception that somehow environmental safeguards come against faster permitting. The current Commission proposal strikes an incredible balance, and it's really key between environmental safeguards on the one hand, necessary for people, for credibility of these local communities, and speed on the other hand. And since we all talk about articles, I'm talking about Article 7.2. It's incredible. The Commission have really done this balancing act. A word on Water Framework Directive. I understand from talking to a number of experts from the industry that the problem is not the European Water Framework Directive. The problem is how some member states decided to implement it, and there's a special case for Sweden. So maybe we can look into that in Sweden, but we shouldn't be throwing the baby with the bathwater. It's really important, those safeguards on habitats, on water, on waste to people. And politically, if we take those safeguards away or we weaken them, the balance of this proposal falls and it becomes polarized because then people are against, right? At the moment, it's so good. It says, look, you meet the standards. The technology is there to do mining better. It is there to decrease the impact, be it water, waste, CO2. So if you do it well, on the process side, we can go a lot faster. That's exactly the balancing act, right? And on top of that, it says that then if it goes to courts, because it has the overriding public interest, ultimately, if the project meets the standards, the project will win. So I don't agree that this will increase the no. I think it will increase the yes, but it will ensure that safeguards are high. And this is so core to this in the parliament, in communities, right? We are just going into a culture war if we lose that balance in these proposals. So that may be a key takeaway from today. For us, recycling can be a bit better, etc. But let's see if we have time today to delve into detail there. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Do you agree, Rolf? This will increase the yeses, not the nos.
I agree that the Critical Raw Materials Act is a good piece of legislation, and it demonstrates concretely the paradigm shift that we all hoped for and that we received. And I'm very happy to hear that the NGO community and Julia is here to represent a part of it. Is also supportive. So it takes away some fears that we will not be successful with the piece of legislation that we have. Now we need to implement it. We need to make it happen fast because lead time to markets in mining and in processing also, but also in recycling, in changing lots of things around the recycling need to happen fast because we don't have time for that. And if we have one thing where maybe Julia and I are discussing a lot is the question on how is the overall framework, because we know the Critical Raw Materials Act is only one piece inside of the change, the paradigm change to a sustainable Green Deal, because it needs to be sustainable through the whole value chain. And we need to demonstrate that we can make it happen in Europe, and that it's not a Green Deal made outside of Europe with products from outside of Europe. So it needs to happen here, and we need to lead on what we think we are front runners in the world. So it's very important and that we think raw materials. Today, when and there are not that many legislators anymore in the room, but I always convey the message. If you think about the Water Framework Directive, and we hope we will be able to revise it and do the changes, and also the Commission needs to think about the Water Framework Directive in the way how it's implemented in member states, and needs to anticipate how it's going to be implemented in member states. So that's maybe a recommendation to the Commission and to the impact assessment, also to see how it's going to be implemented, not only how they suppose it to be implemented. And you need to think raw materials, because when you are going to look at the Water Framework Directive and you want water treatment facilities to be built, you want an infrastructure to be built, and you want desalination, which we unfortunately will need in Europe with all of the drought and the water scarcity that we have in Southern Europe. We will need desalination infrastructure. So we need to make that happen, and all of that infrastructure needs raw materials. So we will need to think raw materials when we look at all of the different legislations that are next to the Critical Raw Materials Act. So it's an enormous piece of work. It's an enormous piece of assessment. And I want, next to all of us who are here in the room, the society, the legislators, to have a better dialogue and to think about the raw materials needs of the society in the future.
Thank you, Rolf. And we just move over to some yes and no questions. So the first round is just yes or no. First question. Will the Critical Raw Materials Act help Europe enough to live up to the Green Deal?
Yes. No.
No. Yes, if implemented fast.
I want to be very optimistic. I say yes.
Okay. Please, Malte, you said you're so sure. You said no.
First, because it's boring if we all say yes. But more on a more serious note, I think it's a question you can't answer in a meaningful way, obviously. And it's obvious to anyone in the room that on its own, it's not enough. So I think we all agree on that. But I think the point I wanted to make is that, yes, we will need the Critical Raw Materials Act. Yes, it is good. Yes, it will go quite a long way towards achieving the Green Deal. But then there's a whole piece which is missing. We have the Net Zero Industry Act. Great. But again, just one piece. And as important as it is, I would say there's a whole part between the mining and putting up the windmill or installing the electrolyzer, which is the whole supply chain in between, which is also where, by coincidence, a lot of our companies sit. So making all of these different components, all of the technology and the equipment to get from the raw materials to the electricity generated by the windmill. And there is no single fix for that. There is no one directive or regulation or act that will solve it for them. And I think a very important message for us is, if we want to succeed with the Green Deal, we need to put the market at the service of the Green Deal. We need to make money with the Green Deal, all the different parts of the value chain. And right now, that's not happening. The reason why there is a conversation around companies investing in Europe or investing in the US or elsewhere is not primarily because of the Inflation Reduction Act. It's because it's not profitable or not profitable enough for these investments to take place in Europe. And that's something that needs to change. And so there's no single fix for this. Unfortunately, I wish there was. That's a lot of hard work, a lot of administrative resolve to get there. But that is critical for us. And so I just don't want the ECRMA to be seen as a kind of silver bullet. And, once we've done it, that's great. We can move on. There's going to be a lot more homework to do.
But Alexandre, you were sort of on the positive side, or you said will do the trick.
Yeah, I mean, half full, half empty. I think I was on the half full this morning, but I can very much subscribe to the arguments Malte just made, and take it for me and make it the same arguments for the different reason and for the different answers. So I think this is the Critical Raw Material Act, as I said, is an important one, highly relevant, and we need to make it work well for companies, for business. But it's not going to be the only solution, obviously not. But I think this is quite obvious what I'm saying here. There is a big arsenal to be developed. A lot has already been developed by the European Commission and by the co-legislators. Others still in the making, and we need all of this to be right.
Okay, let's jump to the next question. Does the Critical Raw Materials Act have the right focus in terms of strengthening, processing, and mining?
This one is
yes. Yeah, I think the
sure, just yes or no. Does it have the right focus in terms of strengthening, processing, and mining?
Yes.
I'd like to say a lot more on this, but for your question here, yes, especially around processing, which is really key for either recycling or any critical metals markets.
And I would say yes as well, even if you can answer yes, but on all of these issues.
Yes.
I think on this one, I'd like to answer no. And if you allow me to be specific, I think there is one article. This one I can't remember the number, but which basically talks about the strategic project and says there is a cap put on the duration of the permits for the strategic project. And if there is no answer at the end of the duration by public authorities, then the permits have to be granted to the project promoters. This is applicable to processing and recycling. This is not applicable to extractive industries and mining. I don't fully understand why. And this is why I think the balance in the Act is maybe not so right yet.
Okay, let Rolf come in and then Julia.
Yes, I see your point, Alexandre, but have we ever been talking about permitting at European level? I don't think so. So that's a huge opportunity. It's a unique opportunity. And I'm grateful for Business Europe and Alexandre that they have picked up the discussion inside of the biggest business association in Europe to see how we can help to find the bottlenecks and what are the hinders to permitting, because there are multiple from the local level, and it will be difficult to steer everything from European level to the local level. So I think it's really a big yes to the Critical Raw Materials Act. We need to make it happen. We need to get it right, and we need to get it right fast, and that's the challenge.
Before you can answer soon, but we're soon opening up the floor to you guys. So if you have anything you would like to share with us, any comment or a question, please let us know in a little while. So please, Julia.
So maybe just to add 2 words on recycling, something we haven't touched upon a lot today. So we talked a lot about extraction. We will need new extraction. There's no questions there. But I think living in a continent like Europe, whether we like it or not, the best resources for many metals are not in Europe. But what we do have is a huge mine, which is our waste. We're a huge consumer continent. You all have cobalt in your cupboards, right, in your old phone, etc. And it's very wrong to say that we still need to wait 20 years for recycling. Actually, today, all our consumer waste, things at the end of life of batteries, so black mass, when you shred your battery and it turns into this black, literally thing, which contains nickel, lithium, cobalt, it's not processed in Europe because we don't have facilities at the scale needed. It's quite often snatched by the Chinese, South Koreans, and they keep it as a valuable metal and turn it into batteries. That's a really big missed opportunity in Europe. Today, not in 2035. So without going too much into detail, I think that's where the Critical Raw Materials Act can be a lot stronger. One, by keeping that black mass in Europe, we can qualify it as waste. It's not qualified today, and it will help us keep it here for our industry. But two, by using the strategic projects to scale that material recovery facilities. It's the same processing, material recovery for recycling, same skills, same facilities are not at scale today in Europe. So we're really missing this opportunity. So look at that again, because it's something we can already do today, whether we like it or not. Setting up a new mine in Europe will take years.
Maria, what do you say?
Just a comment on recycling. I think recycling is extremely important, and I'm glad this is part of the Critical Raw Material Act. And I think there is, just as with the trade perspective and the internal perspective, there is no opposition between recycling and primary mining, because we will need both. And actually, to work together with primary mining and also secondary mining at the same time, that is one of the most efficient ways of getting this actually to happen. And we have clear examples of that. Boliden, for example, who was on the stage earlier, they have Europe's largest facility for electronic scrap recycling, and they process this together with their primary material from their mines. And that makes the processes more efficient. So I think we have a lot to gain here from working together from the mining sector together with the primary extraction.
I'm moving on here in my sort of questionnaire. Should mining be increased here in Europe? Alexandre? I don't really know what you're going to say, Maria. Yes?
Obviously, yes.
Yes.
If it can be done with the high standards, yes. I'm sorry, but if to do mining in Europe, we have to roll back our environmental safeguards, then the answer is no.
We don't need to roll back our environmental safeguards, and we can prove that sustainable mining in Europe for Europe is possible.
So you're yes, but if
welcome to the NGO world.
Yeah. So more mining, obviously that is needed, and you're all open to have it here increased in Europe. But how does Europe, and Sweden, I'm turning to Rolf and Maria representing the mining community, act in order to be socially responsible when expanding mining activities?
That's communication. And a good business case like it was developed includes good communication, and a good business case includes the sustainability aspect. And our setting in Europe with the rules of law allow for dialogue between communities. And we should not always have only the ugly pictures outside in the world about mining in our heads. We need to come and see and invite everybody to see what's happening in Kiruna or elsewhere in Europe in the mines. And then I think we have a good possibility to convince and to demonstrate that mining is part of the European society.
No, but I think the basis is the dialogue with the local communities. No matter which groups we're talking about, there is always local communities that are affected. But I think also I would like to mention the fact that in Sweden, in the communities where we have the mines, we have what could be called like North Korean figures on likability for the mining sector and for the development of the mining sector. So we see that where we are present, and also I would say that the companies are doing a very good job in having that local dialogue, and that the local communities see that they benefit from having the mines there. There we also feel that we have a great support. So I think also we need to talk about that, the fact, what do we bring to the society? How can we work together? How can we minimize the impact while we're operating? And how can we also work on restoring the nature and the landscape after we leave, after the mining is finalized. So I think all these will be part of being a socially responsible actor in the mining sector in the future.
And moving over to the if part of your last answer, that how should the mining industry of Europe act to become more socially responsible when expanding our activities?
Yes, so maybe two points here. First of all, what we see today, the mining sector has really developed, and speakers before said that, right? Actually, lots of innovations in mining are happening outside of Europe because more mining happens outside of Europe. But the technology today to do this to the high standards, it's not always implemented by companies, but it's feasible. So as long as everyone consistently does it to the same level, that's one part of the answer. And that's why CRM Act, for us, it's so important not to roll back. You roll back requirements, you don't consistently apply best available technology. But the second really important insight are local communities. I mean, we don't have here today anyone from local communities. We could have had someone from Sami community, maybe. It's very important. Indigenous peoples, right, in Europe. But I would say here, what I hear a lot, especially at industry events, is something about we should do communication, a bit of PR for sustainable mining, right? We should raise awareness, educate people. It's about having these people on board. And having them on board means including them in the process, early, during, after, and treating them as equal stakeholders. They are partners in this. They live on that land. It impacts their environment, whether we like it or not. Just bring them on board. For example, a good example is when something happens, something sometimes goes wrong, right? It's just the world we're living. There can be a leak. The first people who will notice that will be that local community. So having that communication with them can actually save you a lot of time and money as a company to react quickly, right? So they're not just these last people who are so difficult and you just need them to say yes. They are partners in this, and that partnership can really help.
Rolf.
You are a bit twisting the words, Julia, because communication, dialogue, and exactly what also Maria explained is showcasing. So we are. It's not invented that the figures of local acceptance in Corona are very high. I don't need to repeat that. And also, you're painting a picture of that. There was a big revolution, and there was no picking up. There was no structure that is organizing that communication dialogue between. I think we should not polarize the things like this. We should pick it up and we should do it and make it happen. I understand from what I see, for example, with the Sami people, that they have a parliament in Kiruna, that it's taking care. There's always room for improvement in everything. But I think it's not our role to polarize this. We need to see how it's happening, and then we need to pick it up like every other thing. Yeah? I run an association. I have a family, and we always have dialogues, and it's not always easy. And we manage, and I think we need to define us as a European family, and then we need to talk and define ways forward. And I would also not be too critical about our rules of law, of our constituencies and all of the legal framework that we live in. I'm proud to be European, and I'm convinced it's one of the best democratic models in the world. And I want to not be too critical about how it's handled. And I think that there is a good way how we are doing it in Europe.
Can I just react because it was directly at me? I just wanted to clarify because I have never said that in Sweden it's not done correctly. I actually think Sweden has some of the best practices with local communities, in Germany as well, but it's not always the case. And a good example would be what happened in Serbia, where exactly the opposite approach to communities was taken, but not in Sweden.
I just wanted to add a point on this conversation around dialogue, because of course dialogue is important and we can always do better. But I think really important in that dialogue is the honesty with everyone, industry, citizens, that there are trade-offs involved. We cannot have it all. And there are trade-offs involved between different environmental goals. There are trade-offs involved between climate goals and environmental goals. There are trade-offs involved between industry interests. We cannot have all the industries in Europe indefinitely continuing to grow. And there are even trade-offs involved between generations, I would say, because of course we can take a lot of money and pay for the pain of some of the losers today. We're just going to burden future generations with all the debt. So whatever we do, there are trade-offs and there are choices to make. I thought that was really nice in the video at the beginning. You indicated this. I thought the colleague from the parliament also mentioned this. Let's be clear, what is really strategic, and accept not everything is strategic. Otherwise, it defeats the purpose of saying it's strategic. And I think that is an honesty that we all need to have, but especially our political leaders need to have. I think we are promising too much, that if we just talk enough about it or we just throw enough money at it, somehow everyone will be happy. And of course, we're setting ourselves up to be disappointed. And better be honest up front than to let people be disappointed after.
Thank you, Malte. Finally, before we open the floor to you and prepare your comments and questions, please. What are your most important inputs now as the Critical Raw Materials Act is being negotiated?
So, one, as I said, I think we need to make it right in terms of external and being strong on the diversification, and being strong and doing better on internal along the full value chain in Europe. That's one. Second, on permits, I think the Commission has put on the table a good basis. There is probably room for doing better, faster, including, I think, around the environmental impact assessment without compromising on quality. And thirdly, as I said, I think the data, which will be required from companies, I see some duplication in the Act. And I think this needs to be fixed. We should really avoid asking twice, 3 times the same information to companies. There is a lot in terms of reporting in European legislation, and this needs to be fixed better in the Critical Raw Material Act.
Thank you, Alexandre. We'll just move on, please.
So, subscribe to all of them. I won't repeat them. Let me build on the point that I made earlier around competitiveness and creating the right market, which of course is about much more than raw materials. And I think applause to the Swedish presidency, because they are really behind this notion of we need to be more competitive, and there are plenty of things that we need to do. But there are some that we can do also in the Critical Raw Materials Act. So for example, on the supply chain monitoring and information provision requirements, some of those we fear are going to be undermining competitiveness for the downstream players, because they are coming to our business models and to our trade secrets. So we are very nervous about those, like in other areas where there are kind of disproportionately heavy information and supply chain intervention provisions. And the second part where competitiveness in the raw materials discussion is really key is when we look at the world outside of Europe and our access to supply chains and raw materials from outside of Europe, because those will continue to be important. We need those. We're not going to be able to mine everything here. And so when the communication that was released with the CRMA talks about some of those trade defense measures, we get very nervous. Yes, we need a level playing field, and we have these instruments for the right reason. But we saw with the safeguards on steel, for example, that it's not scientific, it's political when the safeguard measures are used, and they were damaging our industries a lot. So we are very nervous that safeguard measures and the relationship with our trading partners are political playing balls, and those will harm our competitiveness. So that's something specifically on raw materials that we want to keep a very close eye on.
Thank you, Malte. Let's continue with Maria.
I think I said my priorities earlier, which is to keep the strong political signal that we need to strike this balance between the trade flows and what we can do internally, to keep the focus on exploring and prospecting. We haven't talked much about that today, but that is really the starting point for the mining life cycle, and how can we improve Europe's attractiveness for those kind of investments. That might need to be strengthened a little bit within the framework. And also the focus on permitting. How can we further improve that focus? I think those are the 3 main, most important things from my perspective.
Okay, thank you.
So just briefly, first and foremost, we really support the speed behind of all of this. So we want to keep the speed. Now, if I look at Critical Raw Materials Act, but also Net Zero Industry Act more broadly, what it lacks overall is a finance pillar, investments pillar to actually make all those projects happen fast, scale, etc. So finance missing. Second thing, so keeping that balance between environmental safeguards and permitting, as I mentioned. And last but not least, we would like to see some strengthening around industry schemes that will be used for compliance. Not all industry schemes are equal. We'd like to see really those that are independent, have multi-stakeholder governance, independent audits, etc. Only those can really qualify. And they should never be a sole issue of compliance, right? They're not for compliance. Ultimately, companies are there to demonstrate compliance. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. The last final word goes to you.
Yes, and one addition is to be made to the scope of the raw materials that are in the focus. So you can talk about strategic, you can talk about critical, but indispensable, necessary raw materials that complement that list. And we need to secure that in that field also permitting and the possibility to develop activities in Europe are pushed forward. So it's not only to simply look at one strategic raw materials that's going to make the trick. We don't know what the technology of the future will need as raw materials, so we need to have also a broader access to all of the raw materials. And more specific to the articles and the annex, that means if you talk about rare earth specific grades, or you talk about nickel specific grades that are in the focus, we would recommend the co-legislators now to get rid of those specific grades, to make it very easy to handle, to simplify it to the commodity and not to a nickel grade that is difficult to at the end identify. And what is then to be supported? Is it only the processing, only the recycling, or is it also the mining of nickel, for example?
Okay, thank you, Rolf. And thank you, everyone, in this last panel. Please give them a big hand. Now, you can please remain here on stage. Do we have any comments from you? Yes, we do have. Could we use this?
I can run.
Hi, I'm Michael Möller. I'm with the Swedish Chemical Federation. So it's clear now, after today's fantastic display, that Sweden is the land of mining opportunity, and we love it. That's good. Malte was mentioning the importance of value chains. And of course, transitions is about transitions in the entire value chain. So my question is, strategic input, for example, us in machinery and for Malte's companies. The mining company needs construction materials, you need size explosives that we gladly supply, and machinery from Malte. So how do you make an act like this inclusive of that? So you get a good functioning of the value chain. Thanks.
And who are you addressing? You're addressing the panel?
I think they're all interested.
Just a quick reflection. Of course, I mean, that is what we're trying to showcase as well, that we are interconnected. We are value chains. We need each other. And it's not only the strategic or critical minerals that are the important ones. We need the whole value chain to function. So most definitely, I have to admit, I have no answer to your question on how we should include that into the Critical Raw Material Act. I think we have to accept that this focus for that act is on what is defined as critical for Europe right now and strategic. But I would very much support an approach where we, for example, look at the permitting processes more in general, not only for what is qualified as a strategic project according to this act. So we would definitely support that.
Okay. Julia and then Rolf.
Just to add, so the reality is that we have to focus and we have to prioritize. We have to focus and bring those key value add materials and also parts of the value chain, solar panels, heat pumps, electric vehicles, etc. But the reality is once you bring those big parts of the value chain, the entire value chain and supply chain comes with it. It creates the market for that. So then there's a bit of everything. I mean, producing electric vehicles here, producing batteries here, brings so many suppliers to set up shop in Europe, and you don't need a special regulation for them.
I would turn the question around. I think the Critical Raw Materials Act is there to meet the needs of the chemical sector, of the airspace, defense, and all of those sectors. So we are there to supply the raw materials and to guarantee the supply of raw materials. I don't know if it was mentioned today, but 2 years ago we had a lack of magnesium metal in Europe. And there was no magnesium metal to alloy aluminium and steel, which was desperate because 95% of magnesium metal comes from China, and we have closed down our last plant in Europe 10 years ago in Norway and in France. This clearly showed that we are highly dependent on strategic raw materials, and that's to meet the purpose to build up the infrastructure for the chemical sector, the pipelines, and all of what is evidently needed from the society.
Malte, do you want to fill in?
Yeah, two points where the value chain needs to be better reflected, not in the CRMA actually, but in other instruments. One is the Net Zero Industry Act. So in the Net Zero Industry Act, there is already a provision that part of the value chain would be supported under the different provisions of the Net Zero Industry Act. So the machinery, the components, the equipment. That's great. But that shouldn't be the case just for building windmills or solar panels. That should be the case for all the efficiency technologies as well. So decarbonizing the energy supply, but also making industry and society more efficient. Those are clean technologies that are not yet there, where the value chain could be reflected. Second is in the financing and the taxonomy specifically, and we heard about financing. We need the enabling activities to be properly reflected in taxonomy. And a lot of the products and sectors we're talking about here are enabling sectors. That is now starting. So Taxo 4, the latest delegated act under the taxonomy, is starting to shift that way, but there's a lot more to do in the context of the taxonomy.
Okay. Do we have any other? Thank you. Do we have any other comments or questions? Yes.
Hello, I'm Anne-Marie Begenius from SMR Mineral in Sweden. We are a lime company. We are producing lime and burnt quicklime. And I'm just wondering, why isn't lime on the critical act list of important materials? I understand that you are living in the belief that lime is abundant and we have enough lime to building and so on. But lime is a material which you need for the steel industry to produce high quality steel. And this kind of lime that has this high quality chemical composition and is produced to a very high quality is not abundant. And there's also a problem in Sweden with the permitting to get the lime. And we could say like this, if you don't have lime, you can live in the woods hungry and naked. And soon you will be cold and very hungry. So that's my question.
Okay, thank you. So why isn't limestone on the critical raw materials list?
Actually, I guess that's a question for the European Commission rather than us in the panel here. But I definitely agree. The limestone producers of Sweden is also among our membership in Svemin. And we know the importance of that. But unfortunately, not everything can be on the critical list according to the methodology applied by the Commission.
Thank you. And I think that has to be the final answer, the final question, and the final words here from the stage today. So thank you very much, all speakers on stage, and those of you who have already spoken, and everybody has been listening in this morning. And the race for metals and minerals is global. And in fact, like we stressed this morning, the access to metals and minerals will set the pace for the green transition. And Europe has a great potential to play an important role here, and even to be a role model for the rest of the world. If you are to bring with you only one thing from this morning, I guess you know what the answer is. The answer is the green transition starts below ground in the mine. Thank you very much. Thank you.